As the Romulan Star Empire joins the Dominion War, she now faces the full force of the Dominion war machine, with swarms of attack ships and legions of Jem'Hadar troops, with the coming battles demanding more troops than the Imperial army can currently muster, and the war remaining controversial among the Imperial Senate. A radical solution is required to bolster the front lines. Bold and unorthodox solutions are proposed by Imperial officers, from new ship designs to the development of so-called superweapons, with some even suggesting to employ the slave races of the Empire as soldiers. Whatever the proposal, no stone was left unturned in the Empire's quest for a quick and decisive victory. However, in the post-war years, the terrors they had unleashed would soon cast a shadow over their glorious victory. From 2373, the Federation and Klingon Empire were ravaged in the most destructive conflict in the history of the Alpha Quadrant, the Dominion War. Despite the size and resourcefulness of the Federation and the stubborn resilience of the Klingon Empire, the two powers were only just holding back the tide of the Dominion war machine, which threatened to sweep over the entire Alpha Quadrant. During this period, the Romulan Empire chose to remain neutral. This was partially motivated by the shock of the Battle of the Omarion Nebula, in which a joint Tal Shiar and Obsidian Order fleet attempted to destroy the Founder's homeworld, only to be trapped and overwhelmed by over 150 Jem'Hadar fighters. This battle demonstrated clearly that the Empire was far from ready for war with the Dominion, and Imperial High Command would spend the next 3 years working to rectify these shortcomings. More significantly, however, the defeat seriously crippled the Tal Shiar, with the once feared organization losing many of their best and brightest officers, and their aura of monolithic omnipotence shattered. Many more unorthodox and dissenting voices felt emboldened to openly pursue their agenda. As the chaos of the Dominion War unfolded, the Senate continued to favor neutrality, with many citizens tired of war and conflict, and the Imperial Navy savoring the opportunity to build up and modernize her fleet, in the hope of being able to steamroll whoever came out victorious. However, in 2374, it was clear to many in Imperial High Command that such a strategy may not be effective against the Dominion, who had already demonstrated a striking ability to replenish their losses. With the addition of captured Federation worlds and infrastructure, would only grow more formidable. As a result, Imperial High Command uncharacteristically advocated for a strike-first policy, in the hope of striking the Dominion at its weakest, allowing them no time to recover. In any case, they recognized the importance of seizing the initiative against the Dominion. Thus, when Senator Vreenak was assassinated by the Dominion in 2374, the Praetor, using his executive powers, declared war on the Dominion. This was greeted by many in High Command with relief, as they realized they would not be fighting alone. However, the war remained a contentious issue within the Imperial Senate. So tenuous was the balance in the Imperial Senate that a single defeat may result in their withdrawal from the alliance. Fortunately, the Imperial Navy was able to seize the initiative and make a series of swift advances into Dominion space before the enemy could react. Even so, a sizable minority in the Senate strongly opposed the war, with many senators undecided. Thus Imperial High Command had to take the political impact of their actions into account, significantly tying their hands. As the war continued, with ground battles erupting across the front lines, further issues began to manifest in the form of high attrition rates resulting from the mismatch between Romulan ground troops and the fanatical Jem'Hadar. Traditional Romulan ground doctrine favoured deception and manoeuvre, with firefights simply used as a means of pinning down and capturing the attention of the enemy, while other units would, with stealth and agility, outflank the enemy position. The goal of such a doctrine was to attempt to force the enemy's surrender in exchange for relatively few casualties. However, such tactics proved ineffective against the Jem'Hadar, who were more than willing to execute near-suicidal frontal assaults with terrifying furiosity, overwhelming Romulan positions who were unprepared for such reckless aggression. Even in cases when the Romulans succeeded in surrounding the Jem'Hadar, they would nonetheless continue to fight, never surrendering and fighting to the very last man. In the first 4 months of ground engagements, the Imperial army suffered nearly 500,000 casualties, the equivalent of 5 legions. At that point, it was clear to all that the Imperial army, in its present form, could not sustain such losses. However, there seemed no easy answer to the problem. The Senate vehemently rejected the notion of mass conscription, which would be extremely unpopular, and the Imperial army wished to preserve its professional character. However, the Empire's fortunes would soon change when a group of naval officers, chief amongst them Squadron Commander Suran, offered an unorthodox proposal to incorporate the Reman slaves into the Imperial military, with the offer of freedom in exchange for their service. While this was something of a novel notion, the Remans previously being seen as a lower species, savages fit only for servitude and manual labour, the Imperial army was sufficiently desperate that they approved the proposal with little pause or scrutiny, something which would prove to be their undoing. Though any who did hold doubts found them quickly put to rest by the project's rapid success, with huge numbers of Remans volunteering. Eventually the ranks of the Reman shock troops would grow to over 1 billion. Within the first months, 2 legions had been trained and equipped, and soon after deployed to the front lines, where they did not disappoint. The Remans, with animalistic fury and aggression, were more than content to go to bayonets against the Jem'Hadar, and due to their superior night vision, proved extremely effective night fighters. This allowed the Imperial army to maintain constant pressure against Dominion troops, with the Romulan legions attacking by day and the Remans by night, giving the enemy no quarter. The Remans would be used to break the seemingly impenetrable Dominion front lines. Only the strongest would survive. With these successes, it seemed a natural conclusion to many to expand the employment of the Remans within the Imperial military, from employing their latent telepathy in interrogations to the formation of a naval detachment of Reman-crewed warships under Romulan officers. The first uniquely Reman vessel to see employment within the Imperial Navy was the Vampire-class attack ship. While only small, at 80 meters in length, it was extremely agile and could effectively engage the Jem'Hadar attack ships. They were also far more expendable than their Romulan counterparts. Reman ground troops would also see their fighting ability further augmented by the introduction of Scorpion-class flyers, which made for an agile yet highly potent armoured fighting vehicle. While Suran pushed for further support to expand the use of the Remans within the Imperial military, he was rejected by the Senate, and many of the old guard at Imperial High Command were cautious of allowing the Remans too much military might. However, Suran, in his blind lust for power, was not dissuaded and set about furthering the project covertly, far from the prying eyes of the Senate. With the war's end, considerable amounts of Dominion infrastructure and military assets were captured by the Alliance powers, who would temporarily occupy Dominion territory. Amongst the Romulan occupation force were Suran, who now shared command with an elected Reman eldar known as Shinzon. Although in reality the Remans had become an independent force, with Shinzon as their leader. Shinzon, making use of captured Dominion technology and infrastructure, set about constructing in secret a battleship, despite it being expressly prohibited by the Senate for the Remans to possess such a vessel. Shinzon and the men under him, having grown quite accustomed to freedom, knew that Suran's promises meant little to the Senate. If they were to have freedom, they would have to take it by force. While Shinzon was able to source most components from the Dominion or his own ships, there were two components that could only be obtained within the Romulan Empire, that being a cloaking device and a secret weapon of last resort, so terrible not even the Dominion had resorted to such a device. Thalaron radiation is not a naturally occurring phenomena. Rather, it is a form of electromagnetic radiation derived by means of an artificial quantum singularity. As such, only the Romulans have the ability to produce it in significant quantities. Thalaron particles are harvested when an electromagnetic wave is under the effect of extreme gravity, such as within a singularity. The wave is stretched and its subatomic constituents can be isolated, harvested, and refined. Thalaron particles have an extremely short half-life. As such, they must be stored in an energy vacuum and are only imparted charge before use. Thalaron radiation is highly lethal, able to break down organic material on the molecular level. However, it is unique amongst other forms of radiation in that it leaves technology and equipment undamaged, and has an extremely short half-life, lingering only for a matter of hours. As such, it was considered as having the necessary qualities for a tactical biogenic weapon, and during the Dominion War, the Imperial Strategic Weapons Research Bureau sought to develop a viable Thalaron weapon to be used against the stubborn Dominion garrisons who refused to surrender, rather than resorting to a highly destructive orbital bombardment. A Thalaron weapon could be more precise and allow the capture of enemy equipment. However, the Bureau ran into significant issues, that being that the requisites for a starship to mount the weapon would have to be designed around the weapon, and at that time the Imperial Navy was far more concerned with launching their new Valdor battlecruisers, and had little interest in this supposed wonder weapon. With the end of the war in 2375, the project was supposedly mothballed. However, Suran, with the assistance of other conspirators, managed to have its materials transported into occupied Dominion space, where they could further develop the weapon unseen. Shinzon knew that even with its overwhelming firepower and terrifying weapon, his new battleship would be unable to stand up to the full force of the Imperial Navy. If his ship was to survive, it would have to make a technological leap in defensive systems. While the Romulan cloaking device has long been regarded as a tactical utility, able to be used both offensively, defensively, or in intelligence gathering, an extensive and complex tactical doctrine has evolved around its employment. Shinzon would shatter all such doctrines in one fell swoop, making every other ship equipped with a cloaking device obsolete. By using the same technology which the Jem'Hadar used to penetrate the cloak with an anti-proton scan, Shinzon was able to modify all the ship's weapons to be coated in a shell of anti-protons, allowing it to pass through the cloak and only temporarily revealing a small portion of the ship. Without the shackles of oversight, and the employment of Dominion infrastructure was built within 4 years and would be launched in early 2379. When it was launched, Shinzon named it the Reman warbird Scimitar. He then wasted no time in turning his sights towards Romulus. The Scimitar has a length of 890 meters, a wingspan of 1,350 meters, and a draft of 245 meters. It is armed with 52 disruptor banks, including 6 heavy disruptors, 4 long-range disruptors, and 42 disruptor turrets. This is further bolstered by 27 torpedo launchers, consisting of 6 prow burst-fire launchers on either side of the deflector dish, 12 prow launchers along the dorsal quarters, and 6 aft launchers, as well as 2 beam launchers and 1 dorsal turret mounted above the bridge, its armament being comparable with that of the Dominion battleship. However, unlike the Dominion battleship, it also mounts a Thaleron generator and creates a biogenic pulse by spreading its wings with the Thaleron channeled to the tips. It is protected by an advanced cloaking device and is also protected by primary and secondary shields. Its hull and nacelles are composed of a thick armoured carapace, as used on Dominion vessels. It can cruise at warp 7.8 and can reach as high as warp 9.7 in pursuit. It has a crew of 1,500 and has a capacity of 2,000 troops. It also carries a complement of 36 Scorpion attack flyers and a further 8 additional auxiliary craft, allowing the Scimitar to effectively spearhead ground invasions. The Dominion influence is extremely visible within the design. From the pattern of the hull plating to the dorsally mounted nacelles and aggressive space frame, the Scimitar is a prime example of the fruits of merging Dominion technology with those of the Alpha Quadrant, offering a terrifying glimpse into the future of starship design. Soon after Shinzon returned to Romulus, he issued his ultimatum to the Senate, which was swiftly rejected, and so Shinzon, with the assistance of his Romulan collaborators, used a Thaleron device to assassinate the Senate. With the Senate murdered, the leadership of the Empire fell to Fleet Commander Sorolok, who hastily returned to Romulus, unaware that the Scimitar lay in wait. Sorolok, aboard his flagship the Generex, a D-Diridex class battleship, and his escort, the Belak, were ambushed 2.2 light-years from Romulus. Despite the power of his ships, Sorolok stood no chance against the Scimitar, which fired through its cloak, and within minutes the Generax and Belak were destroyed, and Praetor Shinzon now stood unopposed as the leader of the Empire. To secure his rule, Shinzon now had to carry out the conquest he had promised his Romulan allies, to launch a preemptive strike against Earth, followed by a full Romulan invasion of the Federation. To further this goal, Shinzon invited the Enterprise to Romulus, notionally for a diplomatic contact, but in reality he hoped to garner intelligence on Federation deployments as well as hoping to destroy the Enterprise while she was isolated. In the ensuing battle, the Scimitar was able to disable the Sovereign-class Enterprisee and 2 Neorexan-class warbirds who attempted to mount a counter-coup. The Scimitar was only destroyed after her Thaleron matrix malfunctioned, causing the ship to lose containment and be destroyed. While the Scimitar was destroyed, it made a definite impression upon all in the Empire, and it would go on to heavily influence future Romulan starship design, with many going on to attempt to replicate this iconic design. The Scimitar remains an evocative symbol to the Reman people, as the blade striking from the shadows for freedom.